Dean Martin discovered his manager had Mafia connections. His brilliant strategy to break free safely became Hollywood legend, proving that sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come from the people you trust most, and that intelligence can triumph over intimidation when you know how to play the game. It was Tuesday morning, September 14th, 1965, and Dean Martin was in his Beverly Hills home office, reviewing contracts for his upcoming television season, when he noticed something that didn't make sense. His manager, Vincent Romano, had been handling Dean's business affairs for 3 years, and Dean had always trusted him to negotiate the best possible deals for recordings, film appearances, and live performances. But as Dean examined the latest batch of contracts that Romano had brought for his signature, he spotted discrepancies that suggested someone was skimming money from his earnings in ways that were both sophisticated and carefully concealed. Dean Martin was 50 years old and had been in the entertainment business long enough to understand the financial side of his career. He wasn't the kind of performer who simply signed whatever papers his manager put in front of him. He read contracts carefully, understood percentage breakdowns, and paid attention to the details that determined how much money he actually received from his various business activities. What Dean was seeing in the recent contracts was a pattern of fees, commissions, and expenses that didn't match what had been verbally agreed upon during negotiations. Small percentages were being redirected to companies that Dean had never heard of. Booking fees were higher than industry standards, and there were consulting charges for services that Dean couldn't identify or remember authorizing. Individually, none of these discrepancies were large enough to raise immediate red flags. But collectively, they represented a systematic method of diverting significant amounts of money away from Dean's earnings and toward unknown recipients. Dean's suspicions were further aroused when he realized that Romano had been discouraging him from hiring an independent accountant to audit his finances, claiming that such reviews were unnecessary expenses that would complicate their business relationship without providing any real benefits. Rather than immediately confronting Romano, Dean decided to conduct his own investigation to determine exactly what was happening and who was benefiting from the apparent financial manipulation. He quietly hired a private investigator, Marcus Sullivan, a former FBI agent who specialized in entertainment industry fraud and had experience dealing with organized crime infiltration of legitimate businesses. Sullivan's initial findings were disturbing. Vincent Romano was not just skimming money from Dean's earnings. He was using Dean's career as a front for money laundering operations connected to the Chicago crime family. The mysterious companies that were receiving percentages of Dean's income were shell corporations designed to disguise the flow of illegal money through legitimate entertainment industry transactions. But Sullivan's investigation revealed something even more troubling. Romano wasn't working alone. He was part of a larger criminal organization that had been systematically infiltrating the management of major entertainers, using their careers to launder money, evade taxes, and create legitimate income streams for organized crime figures. Dean was faced with a dangerous dilemma. Simply firing Romano would likely result in retaliation from the criminal organization, which had too much invested in their operation to allow Dean to walk away without consequences. Confronting Romano directly could put Dean's career, his family, and possibly his life at risk. But continuing to work with Romano meant being an unwitting participant in criminal activities that could eventually result in federal investigations, tax problems, and the destruction of everything Dean had worked to build during his career. Dean needed a strategy that would allow him to break free from Romano's influence while protecting himself from the inevitable retaliation that would follow. And he needed to implement that strategy in a way that would ensure the criminal organization couldn't simply replace Romano with another corrupt manager who would continue the same illegal activities. Dean spent 2 weeks developing a plan that was both brilliant and perfectly legal. Instead of confronting Romano about the criminal activities, Dean decided to create a situation that would make it impossible for the criminal organization to continue using his career for their illegal purposes, while simultaneously gathering evidence that could be used to prosecute everyone involved. Dean began by quietly renegotiating several of his major contracts, working directly with venue owners, recording companies, and television networks to restructure his deals in ways that would eliminate the mysterious fees and commissions that Romano had been diverting to the shell companies. But Dean was careful to present these renegotiations as routine business improvements rather than responses to criminal activities. He told Romano that he wanted to maximize his earnings by eliminating unnecessary expenses and streamlining his business relationships. Romano initially resisted these changes, claiming that they would complicate his management duties and potentially harm Dean's relationships with important industry figures. But Dean insisted, using his star power and established relationships to bypass Romano's objections and deal directly with the people who controlled his most lucrative opportunities. As Dean renegotiated his contracts, he also began implementing new financial controls that would make it impossible for anyone to divert money from his earnings without his explicit knowledge and approval. He hired an independent accounting firm to audit all of his business activities, established new banking relationships that required his personal approval for all transactions, and created documentation requirements that would expose any unauthorized financial activities. But Dean's most brilliant move involved the way he handled Romano's inevitable resistance to these changes. When Romano began protesting that Dean's new financial controls were making it impossible for him to effectively manage Dean's career, Dean offered him a solution that appeared generous but was actually a trap. Dean suggested that Romano should focus exclusively on booking live performances, which were the most profitable part of Dean's career, while Dean would handle his own recording contracts, television deals, and film negotiations. This arrangement would allow Romano to demonstrate his value as a manager, while giving him access to the revenue stream that generated the largest commissions. Romano agreed to this arrangement, apparently believing that it would give him continued access to significant amounts of money that could be diverted to the criminal organization. But Dean had structured the new arrangement so that all booking fees, commissions, and expenses related to live performances would be paid directly to Dean's new accounting firm, which would then distribute Romano's legitimate commissions while documenting every financial transaction. This meant that Romano could no longer divert money to the shell companies without creating obvious evidence of criminal activity that would be detected immediately by Dean's accountants and documented in ways that could be used for prosecution. Romano found himself in an impossible situation. He could no longer fulfill his obligations to the criminal organization because Dean's new financial controls made it impossible to steal money without being caught. But he also couldn't simply quit as Dean's manager, because that would alert Dean to the criminal activities and potentially trigger investigations that would expose the entire operation. Dean allowed Romano to struggle with this dilemma for 6 weeks, during which time Romano became increasingly desperate and made several mistakes that provided additional evidence of the criminal conspiracy. Romano attempted to convince Dean to return to the old financial arrangements, claiming that the new controls were creating problems with bookings and reducing Dean's income. When Dean refused, Romano tried to pressure him by suggesting that certain business associates might be unhappy with the changes and could make things difficult for Dean's career. Dean's response to Romano's veiled threats was to express concern about these unnamed business associates and suggest that perhaps it would be better if Romano found a different client whose business practices were more compatible with his management style. Romano realized that Dean was essentially firing him, but in a way that didn't appear to be connected to any suspicion about criminal activities. Romano could either accept the termination gracefully or reveal the criminal nature of his business relationships by escalating his threats or protests. Romano chose to escalate, which provided Dean with exactly the evidence he needed to complete his strategy. When Romano began making explicit threats about the consequences of ending their business relationship, Dean calmly informed him that their conversation was being recorded and that copies of the recording would be provided to the FBI, the Nevada Gaming Commission, and the Internal Revenue Service. Dean then revealed that he had been aware of Romano's criminal activities for months, had documented all of the illegal financial transactions, and had been working with federal investigators to gather evidence that would be used to prosecute Romano and his criminal associates. Romano's reaction confirmed everything that Dean had suspected. Instead of denying the criminal activities or claiming innocence, Romano immediately began trying to negotiate a deal that would allow him to avoid prosecution in exchange for providing information about the broader criminal organization. But Dean's plan included one final brilliant element. He had arranged for federal agents to be monitoring his conversation with Romano, which meant that Romano's admissions of criminal activity were being recorded by law enforcement officials who could use them as evidence in criminal proceedings. Romano was arrested that afternoon on charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The shell companies that had been receiving money from Dean's earnings were shut down, and several other entertainment industry figures who had been victimized by similar schemes were identified and protected from continued criminal exploitation. Dean's strategy had not only freed him from Romano's criminal influence, but had also helped federal investigators dismantle a significant organized crime operation that had been systematically stealing money from some of the biggest names in the entertainment industry. The story of how Dean Martin had outsmarted organized crime became legendary in Hollywood, told and retold as an example of how intelligence and careful planning could triumph over criminal intimidation when someone was smart enough to turn the criminal's own methods against them. Years later, when people asked Dean about the incident, he would always emphasize the importance of paying attention to business details and trusting your instincts when something doesn't seem right. Romano thought he could use my career to hide criminal activities because most entertainers don't pay attention to the business side of what they do. But if you're going to be successful in this industry, you have to understand every aspect of your career, including the parts that aren't as much fun as performing. Dean's experience also taught him valuable lessons about the importance of surrounding himself with trustworthy people and maintaining control over his own business affairs. The federal investigation that resulted from Dean's evidence gathering ultimately led to one of the largest organized crime prosecutions in entertainment industry history. Romano's arrest was just the beginning. The FBI used the information Dean had provided, along with Romano's forced cooperation, to identify and prosecute 12 other corrupt managers and agents who had been operating similar schemes throughout Hollywood and Las Vegas. The investigation revealed that the criminal organization had infiltrated the management of over 30 major entertainers, including several Academy Award winners, Grammy Award recipients, and television stars who had been unknowingly funding criminal activities through their careers. The total amount of money that had been stolen from these performers exceeded $15 million, a staggering sum that represented years of systematic theft from some of the most successful people in the entertainment industry. Dean's role in exposing this criminal network earned him the gratitude of his fellow performers, many of whom had been victims of similar schemes but had never understood what was happening to their finances. Frank Sinatra, who had also been targeted by corrupt management but had escaped financial damage through his own careful business practices, publicly praised Dean's courage and intelligence in dealing with the situation. Dean didn't just save his own career, Sinatra told reporters. He saved all of us. These criminals were using our success to fund their illegal activities, and it took someone with Dean's intelligence and determination to stop them. The entertainment industry as a whole implemented new financial safeguards as a direct result of Dean's investigation. The Screen Actors Guild, the American Federation of Musicians, and other professional organizations began requiring managers and agents to undergo background checks and financial audits before being certified to represent performers. New laws were passed requiring detailed financial reporting for entertainment industry transactions, making it much more difficult for criminals to hide illegal activities within legitimate business dealings. Dean's experience also led him to become an advocate for financial education among entertainers, particularly younger performers who might be vulnerable to exploitation by corrupt managers. He began speaking at industry events about the importance of understanding business contracts, maintaining independent financial oversight, and recognizing the warning signs of fraudulent management practices. Most performers get into this business because they love music, movies, or television, Dean would tell audiences at these speaking events. They don't necessarily enjoy the business side of entertainment, and that makes them easy targets for people who want to take advantage of their success. The best protection against being cheated is understanding your own business well enough to know when something isn't right. Dean's advocacy work helped establish the Entertainment Industry Financial Protection Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided free financial auditing services to performers who suspected they were being victimized by corrupt management. The foundation also offered educational programs that taught entertainers how to protect themselves from financial fraud and how to recognize the warning signs of criminal activity in their business relationships. The foundation's work proved invaluable in protecting entertainers from criminal exploitation. Over the following decade, the foundation identified and helped prosecute dozens of additional cases of entertainment industry fraud, saving performers millions of dollars and helping to establish new industry standards for ethical business practices. Dean also implemented personal security measures that went far beyond financial protections. He hired personal security consultants who specialized in protecting high-profile individuals from organized crime threats, understanding that his role in exposing Romano's criminal network had potentially made him a target for retaliation from other criminal organizations. These security measures included detailed background checks on all of his employees, regular security assessments of his homes and business locations, and protocols for identifying and responding to potential threats from criminal organizations. Dean's security team also worked closely with federal law enforcement agencies to monitor any ongoing criminal activity that might pose risks to Dean or his family. The personal cost of Dean's battle against organized crime was significant but worth it. For months after Romano's arrest, Dean received anonymous threats and had to modify his travel schedule and public appearances to ensure his safety. Several business opportunities were canceled due to security concerns, and Dean had to spend substantial amounts of money on protective measures for himself and his family. But Dean never expressed regret about his decision to expose Romano's criminal activities. In interviews years later, he would always emphasize that the alternative, continuing to unknowingly participate in criminal activities, would have been far worse than any temporary inconvenience or security concerns. I couldn't live with myself knowing that my career was being used to fund criminal activities, Dean would say. Whatever problems I had to deal with as a result of exposing Romano's operation were nothing compared to what would have happened if I had just looked the other way and pretended I didn't know what was going on. Dean's victory over organized crime infiltration also had lasting effects on his relationships within the entertainment industry. His willingness to take personal risks to protect his fellow performers from criminal exploitation earned him respect and admiration that extended far beyond his success as an entertainer. Industry leaders who had initially known Dean primarily as a talented singer and actor began to recognize him as someone with exceptional business intelligence and genuine integrity. This reputation opened doors to new opportunities in entertainment production and business ventures that might not have been available to him based solely on his performing abilities. The Romano case also established Dean as someone who could be trusted with sensitive information and difficult situations. Over the following years, several other entertainers who suspected they were being victimized by corrupt management would quietly approach Dean for advice and assistance, knowing that he had successfully dealt with similar problems and could provide guidance based on real experience rather than theoretical knowledge. The biggest mistake you can make is assuming that someone else cares as much about your success as you do, Dean would tell young performers who sought his advice. Nobody has a bigger stake in your career than you do, which means nobody should have more control over your business decisions than you do. Dean's experience with Vincent Romano became a cautionary tale that was taught in business schools and entertainment industry programs as an example of how systematic criminal infiltration could affect legitimate businesses, and how careful attention to detail and strategic thinking could be used to combat organized crime activities. The case study of Dean's investigation and Romano's prosecution became an example of how civilian cooperation could expose organized crime activities hidden within legitimate business operations. If this story of intelligence triumphing over criminal betrayal inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs to know that the best defense against being taken advantage of is understanding your own business well enough to recognize when something isn't right. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was betraying your trust? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible stories about the moments when careful attention to detail exposes criminal deception.